Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Southwest Wonders, Canyonlands and Petrified Forest National Parks, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Arthur Kampmann. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you for joining us here today. Arthur, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you all for taking the time to tune in this afternoon. And I am so thrilled to have you all here today as I get to discuss America's national parks. Some say this is America's best idea, places where history, nature, and adventure all come together in one of the most unforgettable ways. I'm wrapping up National Park Week in the United States, and National Park Week was established to raise awareness for the National Park Service and all they do. And so I just want to say a big thank you to the National Park Service and all of the National Park volunteers that make a lot of the magic happen behind the scenes. My name is Arthur Kampmann. I am a photography expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures. I lead a number of trips in the United States national parks for Natural Habitat. I lead trips up in Alaska on our Ultimate Alaska Wildlife Safari. I lead trips on our Maine Coastal Explorer in Acadia National Park. I lead trips in the winter Yellowstone trip, which is amazing to experience Yellowstone without the crowds. And then I also lead trips in canyon country on our Desert Southwest photo expedition and a lot of our different canyon itineraries. So I spend a lot of time guiding and leading trips in the national parks, but I also spend a lot of time for personal enjoyment in the national parks. I was just in Yellowstone National Park last week on a personal trip with family, and it is just amazing how incredible these parks are and how you just leave with your cup full, if you know what I'm saying. Yellowstone without the crowds in April is just an amazing place to visit. Such great landscapes and wildlife. Now today, my plan is I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the National Park Service, some important acts that really help set the stage for today. I'll talk a lot about some public lands that are very important, other public land managers that are not the National Park Service. And then I'm going to dive into Petrified Forest and Canyonlands National Park, where we have our new escape trips that go to it. And then I will save time at the end of this webinar for some questions. So thank you all for tuning in, and let's get into it. So the National Park Service is an amazing, amazing organization. And their job is to protect all these wonderful landmarks and parks for future generations. They manage over 85 million acres of land in the United States. And it's not just national parks that they manage. They manage over 429 different units, with 63 of those being national parks. So within that, it gets kind of confusing because they do oversee national parks, but they also manage national monuments. They also manage national historic sites. They also manage national battlefields, and they also manage national seashores, lake shores, amongst others. So you might have ended up at a National Park Service site and you see that National Park Service logo and you go, oh, I'm at a national park. That's not necessarily the case because there are only 63 national parks. So something like Gettysburg is not a national park, but it's a national historic site or a national battlefield. The Lincoln Memorial, the World War II Memorial. These are not national parks, but national memorials. But they are managed by the National Park Service. So when we think of the 63 national parks, the largest of those 63 national parks is in Alaska. It's Wrangell St. Elias National Park. I've been there. It's unbelievable, but it is massive. And the smallest that I have not been to is a more recent one, and it is in St. Louis, and it is the Gateway Arch. And so I really want to go there because I do plan to visit all 63 of the national parks at some point in time. And so that one is on the list. Now, there is a new one as of 2021, I believe. That is the New River Gorge in West Virginia. It was originally a national river, and then it turned into a national park because of its scenic and cultural beauty. Now, one thing I see a lot of guests do on the natural habitat trips is they bring their passport to the park's book. And that is something you can get stamped at all 429 of the National Park Service units. So I know it's very confusing, but not all of those 429 units are national parks because they are managed under different statuses. But 63 of them are national parks. And one of the most incredible things is to think that this land was set aside not for the rich, but for everyone in the country. Now, if you're not familiar with this place, this is Yellowstone National Park. It is the world's first national park in 1872. What a concept. Now, it was established before Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho had become states because they became states in 1889 and 1890. But it was not established for the wildlife that we all go there to see today. It was established for what you're looking at right here, if you're watching this screen, the geothermal features. Because in the mid 1800s, late 1800s, we didn't think we could ever run out of wildlife. It was abundant. But these geothermal features, and Yellowstone has the highest concentration of geothermal features on the planet, that is what blew people away, and they recognized we had something special. And so when they established Yellowstone National Park in 1872, they maybe didn't realize what they were doing, but they started an amazing path towards conservation. Now, in the first year Yellowstone was established as a national park, it had 300 visitors. Nowadays, you're looking at a little over 4 million visitors annually. It is a little bit easier to get there now than it was back in the mid 1800s, but still a pretty incredible place that I absolutely love. And if you're ever wanting to go, but you're worried about the crowds, I always say, come on the winter season. It's amazing. You can be at all these incredible sites without the crowds. You just have to brave some colder weather. There were other parks that were established before there was a National Park Service. Some very iconic ones like Yosemite National Park. This is a photo of Glacier National Park that we have an awesome trip that goes to. But all of these parks that were established before there was a National Park Service were managed in kind of a piecemeal style. They were put together. Some were managed by the U.S. Army, such as Yellowstone, which protected the geothermal features and the wildlife that lived in the park. Some were managed by civilian superintendents and the local communities that surrounded them. So they were all managed in slightly different ways because prior to 1916, there was no National Park Service to manage all of them. Some of the famous ones would be Mount Rainier, Crater Lake, Rocky Mountain, and so all of those were national parks before the National Park Service existed. Now, the first land in the United States that we can say was officially protected would actually be Hot Springs, and that is now a national park in Arkansas, Hot Springs National Park. That was the first protected land, they say, in the United States. But then Yosemite National Park was actually a state park in 1864 and then eventually became a national park in 1890. So Yosemite was protected before Yellowstone, but not on a national park level. So pretty amazing and kind of a fun little wormhole to go down. And then in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt passed the Antiquities Act. This gave the president authority to make national monuments by executive order. This was truthfully the first law that provided protection for cultural and natural resources, And it really just laid the groundwork for future national parks to get established as monuments, and then they could get upgraded to full park status. So some famous ones have happened this way, such as the Grand Canyon actually was formed through this method. And then one I'll be talking about in a little bit, Petrified Forest, also was a national monument and then became a national park years later. So the Antiquities Act over time has protected over 85 million acres of land because of this act that President Theodore Roosevelt did pass. And then finally, in 1916, the Organic Act was passed by President Woodrow Wilson. And this act created the National Park Service. So this is 44 years after Yellowstone National Park was established. And this gave the National Park Service the responsibility to manage and protect lands. When the Organic Act was passed, there were 0 national parks created from this act itself. It simply established the National Park Service and gave them the authority to manage the 14 national parks that already existed, plus the 21 monuments that also existed. And it really just laid the foundation for expanding and professionally managing the national parks. Now, in terms of states that have the most parks, California comes in number 1. They have 9 national parks. After that would be Alaska with its 8 national parks, and we do visit 4 of them on our Ultimate Alaska Wildlife Safari, being Denali, Kenai Fjords, and either Katmai or Lake Clark, wherever you choose to do your bear viewing. And then, of course, Utah has the mighty 5. Such incredible parks in Utah that we visit on our canyons trip. And then Colorado has 4 and Arizona with 3. Now, in terms of national park units, Washington, D.C. actually has the most, with 20 to 25, depending on which list you find and read. But there are the most national park units. So those are managed by the National Park Service. None of those are national parks themselves. They are different units that are managed by the National Park Service within the DC area. So like I said, it can get kind of confusing when you're seeing all that, the Lincoln Memorial, and then there's a National Park Service sign right next to it. It's not technically a national park, but it is managed by the NPS. So I hope that makes sense. And then, of course, the American Southwest. This has the highest concentration of national parks in the United States. Some such as Zion or the Grand Canyon, Arches National Park, some that we visit on our canyons trips. Absolutely incredible, and they are known for their landscapes that have just been inspiring people for such a long time. In the Colorado Plateau, really just has such a high concentration of geological oddities that makes it such a unique place. And now, if you're not familiar, we're going to go back in time a little bit here. 80 million years ago, the Rocky Mountains uplifted in what is known as the Laramide orogeny. So when the Rocky Mountains uplifted, it was a lot different than the Colorado Plateau because there were many wrinkles and folds within the Rocky Mountains. The Colorado Plateau uplifted is one big mass. And when that uplifted like that, what it allowed to happen was over time, water and wind in a long period of time could shape these incredible canyons that we have today, and I'll be talking about in the end of this presentation. One of the absolute favorite things of myself and many visitors to the national parks, especially in the Colorado Plateau area, are the dark sky parks. So now so many of our parks are getting designated as international dark sky parks because they provide opportunities to experience the night and gaze up at the celestial wonders that we don't get to see on a daily basis anymore. And it is a very difficult designation to be given because you need the entire community of the national park to buy in to this specific designation. You need the town to change all their style of light bulbs, all the hotels, all the little communities that are around it, so that when the International Dark Sky Association arrives, they can make that designation and go, okay, this community's bought in. There's no like serious light pollution here. And that is just something that so many of our parks are now striving for. And I think it's one of the things that I love the most is when I'm in the American Southwest are those evenings where you get to look up and just be blown away by the amount of stars that you get to see. And I know like Zion National Park, for example, right now, they are in the process of getting the designation. So it's taking the town of Springdale, which is just right outside of the gate of Zion. They need them to get on board, which they are, because everyone wants to be able to see stars like this. And the national parks just span such an incredible array of landscapes. Here we are, if you're looking at the screen, this is sunrise from the top of Cadillac Mountain. This is the first sunrise that you get to experience in the United States and something we do on our main coastal explorer trip. For me, Acadia National Park was my first national park that I got to really experience and spend time in. And I absolutely love it for its rugged coastal scenery. And it just has such a unique history of philanthropy, of people giving back to the community and giving the land back so that all of us have this place to play. And it really is a spectacular park. Or then you can go up to Alaska. You can see Denali, North America's tallest peak. This is 20,320 feet tall. It's astonishingly big. And it's the most vertical rise out of any mountain in the world. It's the centerpiece of Denali National Park and Preserve. Denali National Park is larger than New Hampshire. So it's just a massive place. One thing I absolutely find fascinating is Denali National Park has a group of park rangers that are mountaineer rangers. So they spend the climbing season, which is May into June, on the mountain to assist the mountaineers that are trying to attempt summiting North America's tallest peak. Denali has roughly a 50% success rate, and every year about 1,000 people attempt the climb. It sounds brutal, the weather sounds terrible, so big kudos if you're a Denali Park mountaineer ranger. Of course, the iconic wildlife that we get to experience in our national parks. Whether you're staring at the grizzly bears in Yellowstone that just woke up after a long winter of hibernating, or you're at our incredible bear camp on the coast of Alaska looking at coastal brown bears with their cubs while they forage for clams or catch a salmon. This is stuff that the national park offers, and it brings people from around the world to experience. And speaking of iconic wildlife, to me, this is one of the most iconic animals we get to see in our national parks, the American bison. Once ranging into the many millions from the Great Plains into the mountains, the American bison was hunted nearly to extinction. We can be thankful that people stopped it at the right time. And Yellowstone National Park, to this day, has played an integral role in preserving bison so our future generations can experience this icon of North America. Now, one thing I absolutely love to talk about on my trips in Yellowstone is the work that the National Park Service is doing in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund and then the native reservations such as the Fort Peck Native Reservation. So if you're not familiar, when a bison leaves Yellowstone, it gets into a tricky gray area because of the cattle ranching in Montana. So historically, they either tried to convince the bison to go back into the park. Bison don't like to be convinced, or they actually have to remove them from the landscape because they don't want brucellosis to spread to their cattle. So we've come up with a great solution, and that is, instead of having to kill this animal, we are going to transfer them to the native reservations. And then the native tribes, which revere the bison so much, it's a huge part of their life, they can now have this wonderful animal on their reservations. And so a huge kudos, because it took so much work to do, but to collaborate between the National Park Service, the World Wildlife Fund, and the native reservations to make this happen is simply incredible. Now, when you are either entering or leaving Yellowstone, you will drive through the Roosevelt Arch, assuming you're coming through the northern gate of Gardner, Montana. On this, you will see "for the benefit and enjoyment of the people." This was a quote from the law signed by President Ulysses S. Grant. Roosevelt Arch was built with the inscription to emphasize the park's purpose as a public space for enjoyment and benefit. It was given the name for Theodore Roosevelt because when he was on his tour of the West, he was there as they laid the cornerstone, and he gave a speech before he spent 2 weeks in the park and absolutely fell in love with Wonderland. Now, I like statistics, so if you're looking at this screen, I just have our most visited parks if you're not looking at the screen. And every single year, Great Smoky Mountains National Park blows the competition out. This past year, they recorded 12.1 million visitors. And mostly that has to do with its proximity to major urban hubs. It's within a half-day drive from half of the population in the United States. So it's a very accessible park for a lot of people. They don't have an entrance fee because there's big roads that go through it, and it would just create too much traffic. Personally, I've done the Appalachian Trail through Great Smokies. I didn't find it to be overly crowded, and I found it to be insanely beautiful. So I absolutely loved it. But then if you're looking at the rest of this list, there are a lot of the most iconic national parks in the world. And that's something that I wanted to talk about with this slide, was just how our national parks really have become international destinations, and how people just literally come from around the world to see Yellowstone or Yosemite or Acadia. The list goes on and on. And then on the flip side of that, our least visited national parks, I find a consistent theme to these is they're all very difficult to get to. I would say the National Park of the American Samoa is probably the most difficult to get to. So kudos to those 22,500 that made it last year. Big ups to you. But we actually do visit 2 of these on our Alaska trips, and that would be Lake Clark National Park and Preserve, where our bear camp is, stunning with incredible wildlife, and then of course Katmai National Park and Preserve, where the famous Brooks Falls is. So a lot of these parks I know are on people's list, maybe trying to get to those 63 actual national parks. So definitely, I would just say, get to those least visited ones at some point in time, because I've been to a couple of these and they are incredible. Now, with the national parks gaining notoriety and popularity, one thing I just want to say is I practice leave no trace when I'm in the national park. So when I go in, nothing I'm bringing in stays in. I pack everything out. So leave no trace is a very important principle to practice when you're in the parks. And I just say leave it better than you found it. Because sometimes we greatly outnumber the National Park Service employees. So they don't have all day to go in there and pick up trash. So if you see a wrapper on the ground, do your civil duty and pick that thing up and throw it out, because the next hiker coming through will appreciate that. There are a couple other really important land management agencies I just wanted to briefly touch about before I get into Canyonlands and Petrified Forests. And these are not affiliated with the National Park Service. They're their own agencies, and they manage a tremendous amount of land. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they manage 95 million acres, and their mission is the conservation of wildlife. We absolutely love the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because they're protecting animals that we all want to see and our grandkids, and on and on and on. So if you've ever come on that winter Yellowstone trip, that National Elk Refuge, they're managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then, of course, the U.S. Forest Service. U.S. Forest Service is incredible. This land typically surrounds national parks, which usually makes the national park ecosystem even larger. But the National Forest Service at 193 million acres was established before the National Park Service. And it has more of a multi-use management than the National Park Service, whereas the National Park Service is preservation. You're not taking much out of a national park. The National Forest has a multi-use management where they allow timber harvesting, also recreation, wildlife, limited grazing. Gifford Pinchot, the original forest ranger, said the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And then lastly, probably the least known out of these three would be the Bureau of Land Management, BLM. That's 245 million acres. It kind of goes under the radar because it doesn't have really any truthfully iconic lands, but I love the Bureau of Land Management because you can camp on these lands in the American West and just spend great times. I think, in doing some research, I would say the most famous BLM land would maybe be Alabama Hills in Eastern California. But BLM land at 245 million acres, and then you combine that with the National Park Service state parks. So we have there 640 million acres of federally protected land combined with 190 million acres of state land. That adds up to over 800 million acres of public protected land. Roughly 37% of the United States is public protected land. Astonishing. I am fairly confident that the United States would look a lot different if it were not for these two people. If you're not looking at the screen, I have a photo of Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir standing up at Glacier Point in Yosemite National Park. And that is what some people call the most important camping trip in the history of conservation. Now, Theodore Roosevelt, we call him the conservation president. He, at a young age, was a very sickly young man, and nature is what cured him in the northern Maine woods. He went up there and just started climbing mountains like Mount Katahdin, and he found himself. Nature played a huge role in his life. He protected over 230 million acres of public land between 1901 and 1909. And that includes 150 national forests. And he was an avid birder. I'm a huge Theodore Roosevelt geek. I always wonder how he could pick out bird songs the way he could. And this is, before the advent of Merlin, where we all have help figuring out what the bird song was. He was such an incredible birder that he had a great ear, and he loved protecting birds. And one of the first places he protected was Pelican Island in Florida to stop the plume trade. The other man on the screen is John Muir, the sage of the Sierras, the founder of the Sierra Club. John Muir is just a legend. I find his books to be so poetic. I've read Travels in Alaska multiple times because I love the way he writes. One thing I find when I'm reading his books is he would climb all these crazy mountains, but I don't think he ever had food with him. So maybe not the best hiking buddy, but John Muir was a preservationist. He looked at these landscapes as they were cathedrals, built for the people to enjoy, to recharge their spiritual value. And so when Theodore Roosevelt was on the Loop of the West, that same trip he went to Yellowstone, he visited the Grand Canyon and then made his way to California. He wrote John Muir a letter and said, I would love for you to guide me around Yosemite National Park. And on that, I don't want to stay in the hotels and be around the press. I want to be out in nature and talk about the important things in life. They were up at Glacier Point, photoed here, and it snowed. In classic Roosevelt sense, he said, "Oh, bully, isn't this great?" Muir famously said to Theodore Roosevelt, who was an avid hunter, when are you going to stop your childish ways and put down the gun and protect these animals for good? Theodore Roosevelt took that to heart. He founded the Boone and Crockett Club. He helped found the American Bison Society. If you're not familiar with both those, the Boone and Crockett Club was an original hunter club that actually established a fair hunting society in the United States because that didn't exist before him. So that conversation, that camping trip was integral in conserving a lot of the lands that we get to experience today. So thankful that these two men existed. Okay, and now I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to talk about our upcoming escape trips. I'm going to start on our Canyonlands escape, which also visited the Moab area, Arches National Park, but I'm going to focus in on Canyonlands National Park. Now, Canyonlands National Park covers over 300,000 acres, and it was established in 1964. It is where the Green River and the Colorado River meet to carve some of the most impressive canyon country scenery we have in the world. These rivers have been cutting away at the canyons for 5 to 6 million years, and it allows us to see rocks that are over 200 million years old. Now, Canyonlands itself is broken up into 4 distinct districts. You have the Island of the Sky District, the Needles District, the Maze District, and the Rivers District. All of these are very different, and I can be assured that we will not visit the Maze District on our escape trips because it is so remote, rough roads to get to it, and simply put, a maze. It's kind of a crazy place. It's a wilderness area, so it's really protected. We won't visit that district on the trip, but we will see the Needles District and potentially the Island of the Sky District. Now, the Rivers District would be the other district that is in Canyonlands, and that is discussing where the Green River and the Colorado River meet. Now, the confluence of these rivers has helped create some of the deepest and most spectacular canyons in the American Southwest. And it just showcases erosion, deposition of river carved topography in action. And then it's just framed by the incredible red rocks of the Colorado Plateau. Now, if you're not familiar with the Green River is a little over 700 miles, and it originates in Wyoming in the Wind River Range, which is an absolutely beautiful mountain range. And then the Green River works its way from Wyoming slightly into Colorado and then into Utah, where it then links up with the Colorado River. Now, the Colorado River is one of the most discussed and incredible rivers in the world. It spans 1,450 miles, its headwaters are not that far from the NatHab office in Colorado. It's in Rocky Mountain National Park, or the headwaters of the Colorado River. Now, I don't have an hour to discuss all of the threats that affect the Colorado River, but I will highlight an amazing documentary by Pete McBride. It's called Into the Canyon, and I'll plug it again at the end. But it discusses a lot of the issues that are facing the Colorado River and facing this spectacular canyon country, because the Colorado River is a threatened river. It really is. It should be going into the Gulf of California on an annual basis, and it really does not make it there as much as it should. Now, in part due to damming, in part due to over allocation, and in part due to the rising temperatures and precipitation changes that we've experienced. So highly recommend you check out that documentary or come on one of our canyons trips where we'll talk a lot about this, while also photographing these incredible places, because my goodness, if you're looking at the screen, I find the Colorado River and the canyons it's carved to be some of the most spectacular. Now, an animal I absolutely love that we get to look for in the Canyonlands area is the desert bighorn. Now, the desert bighorn does look a lot like the Rocky Mountain bighorn, but the desert bighorn evolved in hot, arid environments where drought is common. The Rocky Mountain bighorns evolved in colder, more temperate environments that are water rich. So they didn't have to face those same pressures to develop extreme drought resistance. They just didn't have to do that, whereas the desert bighorn did. The desert bighorn has amazing adaptations, and they're able to conserve water via unique kidney adaptations that allow them to retain water while still getting rid of waste. They'll minimize their activity in the warmest part of the day, and then scientists seem to think they have a long-term knowledge of water locations, and they can even go days without water if they're eating the correct vegetation. I love watching them maneuver around the canyons, because a lot of the places we find bighorns are places we would need a helicopter to be evacuated out of. Another thing that we love to highlight in canyon country, in both Petrified Forest and Canyonlands trips, are the incredible native cultures. We have 26 federally recognized tribes within this area, and it's something that we'll definitely be doing on this trip, is checking out the petroglyphs, or the houses that were built by these different peoples. And just amazing, from the ancestral Puebloans to the Hopi, the Navajos. The list goes on, and definitely something we love to highlight and discuss while we're out on the trips. But of course, Canyonlands is just so special for so many reasons, but the canyon country at Canyonlands without the crowds of the other parks is absolutely spectacular. Now, I will finish up with talking about our Grand Canyon and a Sedona escape trip that goes to Petrified Forest National Park. And so I spent a couple nights in Petrified Forest back in 2014, and I camped out in this Martian landscape, and it is on another level. I felt like I had seriously ended up in Mars. There was complete silence, no winds the night I was out there, and just truthfully incredible. But it was created in 1906 using the Antiquities Act that I discussed earlier. And then it got designated as a national park in 1962. So it's just amazing. And so petrification is just an amazing process that I want to talk about, because it is a huge part of this national park. So if you're going to go back in time, we're going to go back 225 million years. This landscape looked a lot different. It was a lush floodplain with huge conifers, so it looked a lot different than the desert that it is today. So trees, they fall, like they do today. They fell back then as well. But what happened then is when the tree fell, it was quickly covered by either a volcanic ash or a volcanic feature called lahar, which is essentially a volcanic mud flow. And when those features cover the tree right away, it prevents the tree from decomposing. And then over time, minerals like silica seep into this buried wood, and those minerals then start to replace the wood's organic material atom by atom while preserving its structure. So it's absolutely incredible. And the result of this is you get a fossilized replica of the tree. Often it has beautiful colors from these minerals, such as manganese or iron, but the trees here are from about 225 million years ago. And something I've often been asked is, are they heavy? And the answer is absolutely yes. It is turned into stone over time. So it's incredible. Another place in Petrified Forest and on the Grand Canyon Sedona trip that you'll get to experience is the Painted Desert. The Painted Desert was named by the Spanish explorers in the 1500s because it looked like a vast canvas painted by nature. I absolutely love the Painted Desert for a photography standpoint. I am a photography expedition leader, and photographing the Painted Desert is one of my favorite places to take photos, especially in the early morning light or sunset light. And then another amazing feature that you'll get to hike through on this trip are the Badlands. And when you're walking through Badlands, you're really just walking through ancient layers of earth shaped over 200 million years in this area. And Badlands form from sedimentary rock, clays or mudstones that have been heavily eroded, and they just result in this maze of ridges and canyons that look like they're out of a sci-fi movie. And one of the things I love so much about the Badlands in Petrified Forest are these sprinklings of petrified wood that you can find throughout the ecosystem. And then, of course, one of the animals we'll be looking for on this trip is the relic of the Pleistocene. That is the American pronghorn. Now, the Lewis and Clark expedition falsely identified this as an antelope. It is not a true antelope, but actually what we would call convergent evolution. And so it evolved on the North American landscape during the Pleistocene, and it is overbuilt for today's standards. It can go over 60 miles an hour, which makes it the second fastest land mammal on the planet after the American cheetah. And so the animal, or not the American cheetah, just the cheetah, the animal it's actually running from is an extinct cheetah called the American cheetah. So back during the Pleistocene, there were a lot different predators, such as the American cheetah, and that is what the pronghorn is running from. And so whenever I'm watching pronghorns, one thing I look for is just those eyes. They're so big. They can seem to be able to see everything, especially on this flat, open landscape. Now, in terms of desert adaptations, their nasal passages are incredible because they can reclaim moisture from exhaled air. They have massive lungs and windpipes that help them breathe fast and efficiently. And you mix that with an enlarged heart and a high oxygen capacity, they're just built for running fast. And then they can browse on some plants such as sagebrush that other animals can't. And that actually can give them enough water to survive in this ecosystem that's pretty dry. They're kind of built for seasonal scarcities in a way. But in many ways, Petrified Forest is just such an incredible place to photograph because of its otherworldly landscapes. So just like here, if you're looking at the screen, we have the Badlands with little dottings of petrified wood. So absolutely love this park. Now, a couple resources and books and documentaries. I love one would be John Wesley Powell's. That's that top one, Down the Great Unknown. That's a great book that discusses the first trip down the Colorado River and what they experienced sleeping on the banks of the Grand Canyon and hearing the rapids getting larger and larger and realizing I have to go through that. They were presumed dead. It's just an incredible story. If you're going to Canyon Country, pick that book up. It'll excite you. The next one, Wilderness Warrior, that's talking a lot about Theodore Roosevelt in the early conservation movement. I will warn you, it's a book by Douglas Brinkley, and he's got a four-part series on early conservation in the United States. These are massive books. So if you're a big reader like I am, pick it up and enjoy it. But also, audiobook is very good for that as well. And then Terry Tempest Williams, Hour of the Land, discussing the spiritual and important values of our national parks. Definitely, I think that's a must read if you visit the national parks a lot. And then last two are documentaries. First being Ken Burns, The National Parks. If you haven't watched that, highly recommend you watch those Ken Burns. He always does an amazing job discussing whatever topic he's on. And on the national parks topic, he knocked it out of the park. So he did a great job. And then the last one is the one where I was discussing about the Colorado River and the issues it faces, called Into the Canyon. I believe you can stream it on Disney if you have those services, or you can rent it on whatever platform you use. But Into the Canyon really does an amazing job discussing the issues that face Canyon Country and the Colorado River. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you. And any questions?
All right, Arthur, thank you so much. Now, before we dive into the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. If you go to the upper right-hand corner and click on those three lines, that will open it up, and then you'll see questions. Click on that and go ahead and put them in there, and so we can get to them. All right, so what time of year, Arthur, do we run these trips through NatHab?
Yeah, our escape trips are going to run in the springtime and fall time. So we don't offer trips to the Canyon Country area in peak summer because, one, it's incredibly hot, and two, it's the most visited time for those parks. So we try to go in the shoulder seasons to give us the best experience. And our expedition leaders always know the best places to go to get away from the big crowds, but being there at shoulder seasons help a lot.
Gotcha, thank you. And how many people will be on these trips with me?
The max you could have is 14 per trip. If you have 14, there'll be 2 expedition leaders, but if there's 7 or less, there'll be 1 expedition leader. So
Got,
14 is the maximum number.
gotcha. And is it possible for me to come out there and do both of these trips? Can I do them back to back? Is that possible?
It is possible. What that would require is our Canyonlands trip starts in Grand Junction, Colorado. And so you could fly into Grand Junction, and then at the end of the trip, I would recommend renting a car or flying. But renting a car, you can drive down to this other trip, or the other trip, which would be about a 7-hour drive, but through some of the most spectacular scenery in the country. And you can then combine those, absolutely. And your adventure specialist would know the best way to do that and what dates to make it work, but you could definitely do that.
Good to know. Thank you. So, any chance we'll see any wild turkeys out there on these trips?
Oh, absolutely. There are, amazing turkey sightings in the American Southwest. And actually, one thing I love, I'm a big geek about the native cultures, is they do find a lot of turkey bones and different bird bones around these native sites. So not just can we find turkeys, there's a huge cultural heritage to turkeys in the American Southwest. So absolutely, you can find some turkeys in the American Southwest.
Gotcha. Good to know. So, how do the national parks count their visitors? There are some national parks like the Cuyahoga and Valley National Park in Ohio that they don't charge. So how do you know how many people are crossing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So a lot of them in my research, what I found is a lot of them will actually just use those road counters because you'll drive over it and then they just make a general assumption on how many people are in the car. They don't just say one person's in the car. Typically, they're saying it's 2 to 3 people from the research I found, but they're essentially counting it via you drive over one of those kind of it's like a strip in the road, very small. You probably don't even notice you've driven over it, but that lets the Park Service know how many cars have been in, and then they make a generalization guess. And that's the same for Smoky Mountain National Park because there are no entry fees into Smoky Mountain. That's a great question.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, that's the last question that we do have for today, Arthur. So I'm going to hand it back to you for any closing comments you may have for us.
Well, I just hope everyone comes away with a deeper appreciation for these incredible places and our national parks. They're just so much more than stunning landscapes. These national parks are sanctuaries for wildlife and powerful reminders of our shared heritage as Americans and international treasures. So just thank you all for taking the time today to listen and talk about our national parks.
Arthur, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel to the Southwest with us at NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. And if you're part of a photo club and would like NatHab to speak to your members about nature or travel photography, email us at webinars@nathab.com. Join us Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We will see you next time.